In a world that never pauses, where constant noise fills the air and demands tug at every corner of our attention, choosing silence becomes a revolutionary act. Not the kind of silence born from suppression or fear, but the intentional quiet that emerges from a deep place of self-awareness and maturity. In this stillness, we find the boundaries that protect our soul, the clarity that organizes our thoughts, and the intuition that speaks with honesty when all other voices fade. Silence is no longer a void to be feared, but a sacred space we retreat to when the external becomes too loud to hear the internal. To remain quiet is not to surrender, but to command presence without display. It's a decision to filter what deserves a response and what can dissolve on its own. In silence, we don't just conserve energy, we redirect it inward, cultivating strength that doesn't depend on external validation. Many misunderstand this withdrawal, labeling it coldness or detachment. But those who choose quiet often do so from a place of deep discernment. They have learned that not everything requires explanation, not every attack deserves defense, and not every invitation must be accepted. What society often fails to teach is that true power lies in what we withhold. We live in a time where overexposure is encouraged, where every feeling must be shared, every opinion broadcasted, and every experience documented. Yet there is immense authority in restraint. There is elegance in being enigmatic. When you no longer feel the need to explain your silence, you begin to master a new language, one that speaks through presence, not performance. This kind of silence aligns closely with what Carl Jung described in his explorations of the unconscious. Jung believed that the path to wholeness required turning inward, toward the shadow, toward the unknown elements of the psyche that society urges us to ignore. But how can one face the unconscious while constantly reacting to the demands of the external world? The answer is simple. One cannot. It is only through intentional stillness, through the cultivation of sacred silence, that the deeper layers of the self begin to emerge. Those who consistently make themselves emotionally available to everyone, who answer every message, who engage in every debate, often find themselves drained not just of energy, but of identity. Emotional overexposure can lead to spiritual depletion. Without boundaries, without the intentional choice to remain silent at times, we become receptacles for noise that was never ours to carry. Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process by which a person becomes their true self. And this process requires solitude. It requires stepping away from the crowd so that the soul can speak without interruption. In that quiet space, something remarkable happens. The mind begins to sort through the clutter. Emotions once blurred become distinct. The voice of intuition grows louder. You start to feel again, not the feelings of others projected onto you, but your own unfiltered truth. You remember what it means to be anchored in your own experience, not swayed by every emotional storm that passes through the atmosphere. Choosing emotional distance in certain situations is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of deep spiritual hygiene. Not every conflict needs our involvement. Not every cry for attention deserves a response. When we learn to step back, to observe without absorbing, we create a powerful energetic boundary. This is not disconnection, it is clarity. It is knowing what is yours to carry and what belongs to someone else's journey. The paradox is that by becoming less available to what drains us, we become more available to what nurtures us. Time spent in silence is not time wasted. It is time invested in realigning with what truly matters. It allows us to approach life with more presence, to respond rather than react, and to discern the voice of the divine beneath the surface of all things. Many people misunderstand emotional availability as a constant openness, a willingness to absorb the pain, confusion, and projections of others. But true availability begins with being present to oneself. When we are always attuned to external needs, we abandon our own. In this self-abandonment, we lose the ability to hear the subtle language of our soul. What seems like empathy can often be enmeshment. What is praised as kindness can, in truth, be self-erasure, the ability to remain silent, to retreat into. Oneself without guilt or justification is a sign of inner integrity, not emotional coldness. There is immense wisdom in choosing not to explain yourself. To remain quiet when misunderstood is one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. It is the recognition that your truth is not always owed to others, and your peace should not be disturbed by the demand for explanation. Silence in such moments becomes a shield, not a wall built from resentment, but a protective boundary forged from self-respect. Jung might say this is the point at which we stop seeking approval from the collective unconscious and begin to embody the self, the journey. Inward is not one of isolation, but of realignment. When you pull back, when you turn down the volume of the world, you begin to access your inner compass. Your values clarify. Your energy recalibrates. And most importantly, your emotional body starts to detoxify from all the burdens you unknowingly absorbed. In the absence of external noise, the internal signals become unmistakable. You begin to distinguish between what feels true and what merely echoes the expectations of others. This process is not easy. The world will try to shame your silence, to provoke your speech, to push you into participation. But silence, when chosen consciously, is an act of radical presence. You are not withdrawing because you are weak. You are pausing because your strength lies in discernment. Not all battles are yours to fight. Not all conversations are yours to enter. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not respond. Sometimes, healing begins where reaction ends. In spiritual terms, silence is where the divine speaks. When all external chatter subsides, the soul begins to sing. This is why ancient mystics sought solitude, why prophets retreated to mountains and deserts, not to escape, but to hear more clearly. When we are still, we tune into a frequency that is constantly available, but rarely accessed. The whisper of the divine does not compete with noise. It waits, patiently, until we are ready to listen. In this state, we begin to value stillness, not as an absence, but as a presence in itself. A vibrant, living awareness that does not need words to express wisdom. There are truths too deep for language, emotions too sacred to be shared in haste, and decisions too personal to be explained to those who are not meant to understand them. Silence becomes not just a tool, but a pathway of being that holds space for grace, for mystery, for the unfolding of inner transformation. Being selectively available, emotionally and energetically, is a spiritual discipline. It is about acknowledging your capacity and honoring your thresholds. Not every interaction is neutral. Some deplete you. Some confuse you. Some fragment your center. And while we are taught to be kind, accommodating, and open, we are rarely taught how to protect our essence from those who cannot meet us with the same depth. To step back is not to close off, it is to conserve what is sacred. Jung's work reminds us that the unconscious communicates through symbols, dreams, and synchronicities. These messages are easily missed when our lives are overcrowded with distraction. When we create space, when we allow for quiet, these subtle communications rise to the surface. We begin to perceive patterns, inner callings, and soulful nudges that guide us toward wholeness. But this guidance cannot compete with constant noise. It requires reverence. And silence is its sanctuary. The paradox of silence is that it brings more clarity than most conversations. In silence, there is no room for manipulation, no space for confusion. There is only truth, your truth. Not filtered by others' opinions or shaped by their expectations, but raw, honest, and unchanging. In this clarity, decisions become easier. Boundaries become firmer. and the desire to prove yourself dissolves. You begin to understand that not everyone needs access to your thoughts. Not everyone is entitled to your processed out silence, then becomes a declaration. A gentle but firm message. I do not need to explain myself to be valid. I do not need to speak to be understood by those who are meant to see me. My peace is more important than your curiosity. It is not arrogance. It is alignment. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are, what you feel, and what you're willing to invite into your energetic field. To cultivate this level of awareness requires courage. It demands that we let go of the compulsive need to be understood, to be liked, to be seen as agreeable. These are shadows of the ego, the parts of us that fear rejection and crave validation. But the soul does not seek applause. It seeks authenticity. And authenticity often looks like walking away from noise, from drama, from the endless cycle of over-explaining your heart to those who never intended to understand it in the first. Placed out in silence, we grieve what no longer fits, what no longer nourishes. We allow ourselves to outgrow roles, identities, and relationships that were once safe but are now too small. There is a death in this process, a death of who we thought we had to be. But in this death, there is also rebirth. Something deeper emerges, something truer, a version of yourself that no longer needs external permission to exist, that no longer needs to shrink or edit itself to be accepted. This is the beginning of sovereignty. When you begin to guard your energy the way you would guard sacred ground, when you no longer entertain conversations that disturb your inner calm, when you choose peace over performance, silence over noise, solitude over superficial connection, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for your own being, you realize that protecting your inner space is not selfish, it's essential. Because from that space, all your creation flows. All your healing unfolds. Jung suggested that individuation, the path to wholeness, is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming fully yourself. This journey cannot be taken in the crowd. It is a solitary path, not lonely, but intimate. It requires silence, because in silence, you confront the fragments of yourself that you've avoided. You sit with your wounds, not to fix them immediately, but to understand them. You hold space for your contradictions, your longings, your truths, that don't fit into polite conversation. As you deepen into this self-awareness, you realize that boundaries are not walls. They are bridges to healthier connections. Saying no is no longer aggressive. It becomes sacred. Saying, I need space, no longer feels like rejection. It feels like clarity. And not answering right away becomes a practice of intentionality, not avoidance. Every action is filtered through the lens of alignment. Every word spoken comes from a place of grounded presence, not urgency. Over time, the people who are meant for you begin to recognize this rhythm. They do not force access. They respect your silence. They meet you where you are, without pressure or demand. And those who cannot do this gently fall away, not because you pushed them, but because your frequency no longer resonates with theirs. This is how the soul cleanses its environment, not with loud declarations, but with quiet alignment. The more time you spend in this state, the more sensitive you become to emotional noise. You feel it instantly when someone speaks from ego rather than truth, when they demand rather than invite, when they project rather than relate. And rather than engage or argue, you simply withdraw. Not because you are weak, but because you are wise. You've learned that your silence speaks volumes, and your absence communicates more than your presence ever could in the wrong company. Eventually, your life becomes a sanctuary, not sterile or closed off, but intentional and alive. A space where every conversation has weight, every relationship has depth, and every moment is infused with meaning. You no longer rush to respond, perform, or explain. You let things be. You let people go. You let silence heal what words cannot. And in doing so, you become a presence of calm in a world addicted to noise. This presence is your power. It is your prayer. It is your medicine. In a society that rewards loudness, your quiet is a revolution. In a culture obsessed with visibility, your invisibility is a sacred retreat. You are no longer trying to be everything to everyone. You are simply being, and in this being, you are more than enough. As Jung might affirm, the self is not born through external validation, but through deep internal integration. The silence you hold is not empty, it is full of soul. The pauses you take are not delays, they are invitations for depth. And the boundaries you set are not walls, they are containers for your sacred essence. So, be unapologetically unavailable to anything that drains your light. Be lovingly silent in moments that demand performance. Be deeply rooted in your own truth, even when no one else understands it. Because in that space, in that silence, in that sacred solitude, you are finally home.